Phoebe's got a tremendous amount of experience, is particularly well known within the field of autistic spectrum disorders. So I'm looking forward to her talk this afternoon. I'm sure you will be as well. There will be time for questions and answers at the end as well. Okay, thank you.
Is this thing working now? Can you hear me at the back? Oh, right, great, okay. I work normally with people with very severe autism, adults and children, everybody from 2 to 65. And I'm working with a way of an approach which is called intensive interaction, which is basically using body language to communicate. Now, with people who otherwise we feel we're completely out of touch with. I want to start by pointing out something to you, and that is that everybody in this room has a different perception of reality. And basically, I know mine's right and yours is wrong, because that is what my senses tell me. Now, if you have autism, your senses are going to give you a very scrambled picture. And although your eyes and your ears and your sense of touch may be working perfectly well, on the way to the brain it's getting scrambled, and we know what happens. If you want I haven't got time to show you a lot of the video, I'd like to, but there's something on YouTube. If you Google my website, you'll get a link, which is a short clip by a woman called Weird Girl Cindy. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but she has taken a film, and she says it's fine when they're just herself and she can watch it in the room. But if a lot of people there, it's too much distraction and her brain just crashes. She says her brain is like a dial-up modem rather than a cable modem. If you give a dial-up modem too much data, it'll crash, and that's what happens to the autistic brain. It's a very, very salutary piece of film. I showed it to the British Psychological Society about a year ago, and their jaws dropped, because it's terribly easy for us to say, oh yes, she's sensitive to light, but to actually know what that means in terms of what's happening in the brain is something quite different. What's happening in auditory terms. Now, the trouble is that we make behavioral judgments, and we base our strategies on our own version of reality and not the version of reality that the person we're engaged with is. And I just want to illustrate that to you because Lynn was talking about how people make mistakes. We make mistakes too. A young man in a day center, I was told, that I went to see recently, I was told he was sexually deviant because he had stripped the T-shirt off a female support worker. And I said to him, I said to them, you know, what color was the T-shirt? And they said, well, it's black with white stripes. And I said, does he do it when she's wearing a plain T-shirt? No. There's nothing sexual in that at all. The young man is experiencing scotopic sensitivity, which is a distortion which comes from particular visual experiences. And so the answer is there not to rush him off to the nearest psychologist, but for the sport worker to wear a plain T-shirt. We make mistakes. And we make them mainly because we do not understand what's going on in sensory terms. Autism is a sensory issue. And what happens, of course, with these processing difficulties is they lead to an unregulated activity in the autonomic nervous system. That is the part of the nervous system which controls things like sweating, breathing rate, heart rate, and things we don't really have control ourselves with. And this leads to an extraordinary avalanche of sensory experiences which are roughly encompassed by pain, confusion and heat. And many of you will have seen people sweating. I've actually seen fountains of sweat coming off people's foreheads when they are getting upset, when they are sensorily overloaded. So our problem is then, how can we establish contact with people who can't communicate with us and we can't communicate with without triggering sensory distress? And what we're going to do is we're going to use their behaviors. We're going to look at what has significance and meaning for them, and we are going to use that to build up conversations. Basically, I do this not just by using this thing called intensive interaction, which is really about body language, but to make an autism-friendly environment. And what you do is you reduce the triggers which are upsetting them, and you increase the signals which have meaning for them, so that you actually build up a meaningful environment. If I could just illustrate that by a man I worked with the other day who has hit himself so much that he's blinded himself in one eye, and he has cauliflower ears. And I was able to reduce. What you're doing is you're transferring their interest from the repetitive behaviors they're doing to themselves, in his case was that, to something, an activity which actually can be shared. Now, he was also making sounds, so I used his sounds to, and when he went, ah, I went, ah, ah. I am not copying him. I am not imitating. I am responding not just to what he is doing, but how he is doing it. And I got him quiet within about 20 minutes. And I taught his key worker to do this, and the head of the section. And they really made a very good job of it. But every now and then he goes off again, and that's when somebody screams down the passage. Now that scream has a particular frequency in it, which really, really hurts him. So you've got to reduce the inputs which are hurting people and increase the inputs which have immediate significance and don't jam up the processing system. Now, we're talking about mostly people with very severe autism. I have to say that it also works with more able people. I worked with a young man who types fluently in Hebrew and English. He has no speech. But somebody emailed him and said, well, you know, don't you find it a bit patronizing and humiliating when somebody uses your body language to communicate? And this is what he answered. He said, no. When my brain is becoming confused, it's like having a delicious conversation. There is at least one thing which my brain will recognize when it's becoming confused. There are some quick things I'm going to say about using body language, sort of sets of rules. There are some books outside which I think, you know, I can't do more than just introduce you to this, but they cover them quite thoroughly, and the film here. We're going to look at a little bit of. What we're trying to do then is to promote emotional engagement. And the people that I see are people I've never seen before, and normally I can get through to them in about 10 minutes. As I say, we are not mimicking, we are responding. We're tuning in not just to what they're doing, but how they are feeling. And we get this from their body language. You know, there's a lot of difference between ah and somebody going ah. It's the same gesture, but the first one tells you they're fine at the minute. The second one tells you that actually stand back because you're going to get thumped. We judge how people feel through their body language. And we are looking at this to see how the people we're engaging with are feeling, and we're responding to this. It's actually terribly easy. It's not something that, you don't have to be an expert. to do this. And it makes an incredible difference to people's lives. We're looking at all the things they're doing. We're putting aside our own agenda and we're paying total attention to the person that we're engaged with. And I was trying to explain this to a rather hostile young support worker, and he just couldn't get the idea of, actually paying total attention. I said, you're playing football as a lad, and the opposing team have got the ball and they're the attackers and you're the defender. What are you doing? You are giving absolutely total attention to that oncoming side, that oncoming engagement. And he smiled broadly, and actually he's come up absolutely trumps with several different things. You've got to get that idea of putting yourself into the person you are engaged with. You put aside your own agenda. And we are looking for the repetitive behaviors. If you try and stop them, you expose people to the autonomic storm. We are going to use those in order to interact with them. You'll see what I mean in a minute. We're redirecting their attention from solitary self-stimulation to shared activity. Now I want to show you a bit of a film, and I only got a tiny bit of time. This is a film I made when I was at a school the other 2 years ago, and I went to see some children. None of the children have I ever seen before, the ones that you'll see. They've all been selected because staff can't get in touch with them at all. The first one is a young man who they're frightened of because he attacks them. And he never gives eye contact. He's not, he's just doing nothing, basically. He looks as if he's got epilepsy because he has various seizures which suddenly go like this, but actually it's brainstem damage. It's not quite the same. And I think we'll go for that now. Just let me, if I can get this thing. Yeah. Hang on, can't see the, what's it? Sam's not getting strong enough messages from his nerves and muscles to the brain. Periodically he gives himself powerful muscular stimuli by extending his arms and legs until they're rigid. I try using light touch, but he flinches. But it works later on when I use firm pressure. And again. Phoebe. Phoebe. Oh, that's a joke. Phoebe. 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 Good. Phoebe. You can't teach anybody anything unless, sorry, no, keep it off. You can't teach anybody anything unless you've got their attention. And that's what we're trying to do, try to get his attention. Now you'll notice that when I said Phoebe, he said, ah, ah. He got the rhythm, he got the pitch. He can't get the word. But in a minute you'll hear him say fee. I wish I knew what I was doing completely here. Phoebe. Phoebe. Ah. Phoebe. 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 Phoebe, good. Phoebe. Good. Good, yes, good. 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 Phoebe.
Where?
Where? And then we've lost it. Now, suddenly we get this. Now, has he by any chance got epilepsy? No? Because there's a very dramatic change suddenly. Does this normally happen, that he goes into spasm?
Only when he's it might know.
He may be overstimulated. Right. Well, I think that's probably enough anyway. Thank you very much indeed. Peter's very withdrawn. The stimulus he's giving himself is through wriggling his feet. And Peter has problems with sound, presumably. That lad has really landed in clover. He's he's left school and gone to a home where they do this with him pretty well all the time. His desperate, distressed behavior has reduced to more or less minimum. I wish I could say the same about all the people. The transition between school and being in the community is a very rough ride indeed. And the one after next landed in a place where, well, I'll tell you when I get there. This young man it's not just the facial language you're looking at, it's the whole body. This young man talks to himself simply by tapping his foot on the ground. So I'm going to use that to respond to him. Sorry. So you need to be quiet, don't we, Peter? Yes, he's got his fingers in his ears. He's hypersensitive to sound.
They chose 3 colours. They had 3 colours. Set tops off and hold all 3 together. And just do Sam. Well, it's only so that we get some kind of...
He's low on
further away it is
proprioception.
from
I'm
the
giving him a
brain,
proprioceptive
who never done
stimulus.
it, so
That's
the further
pressure.
away it is from the brain, the more she can cope with touch. Peter?
Very often they can cope with touch on the feet where they can't cope with it on the rest of the body.
But he clearly quite likes
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. How about this one? Peter? Thank you. Should we do it again, Peter?
Now I'm increasing the pressure. So I'm giving him meaningful signals, signals that the brain recognizes easily.
Thank you. Oh, careful the book. Thank you. Where a child's giving themselves feedback in the form of physical pressure, it may not be enough to echo back visually what they're doing. Scott bites.
Now we come to something here where a lot of people go wrong, because what we have to look at is what signal is the person giving themselves. Now this young man is biting jigsaw pieces. What signal would he be giving himself? Well, try it. What? What signal is he giving himself? It's a physical pressure, isn't it? So if I sit there and do his, what he's doing and expect him to be interested in a visual signal, it's not going to work. So I've got to find some way of giving him stimulus in the area that he's stimulating himself.
And choose jigsaw puzzle pieces, placing pressure on his lips and teeth. He's not interested when he sees that I'm doing the same.
It doesn't tune in to what he's doing.
What we're doing is tapping. So in order to give him a signal that his brain is likely to relate to, I enhance the feedback he's giving himself by using vibration in the area of his mouth. And I ask his teaching assistant to introduce the vibrator slowly by placing it on the back of the chair near his head. And it's actually relieved by chewing and vibration. But you must... Eventually he smiles and holds the vibrator.
You see the change, the immediate change, the joy. Once there's someone out here I can communicate with.
When we come to Finley, we're using his rocking to get in touch with him.
This young man has vestibular problems, his balance, and so he is rocking in order to give himself a jolt which actually has meaning for him. And if he turns around suddenly he falls over and that sort of thing. Normally he spends his time rootling around in a toy box doing absolutely nothing at all with the toys. So I'm going to use his rocking in order to get in touch with him, the rhythm of his rocking. I'm feeding in signals which have meaning for his brain. And you see immediately how he starts to engage with us.
Try and hold it a bit.
And he's really interested in what we're doing, and he's looking from one of us to the other.
And again, you want to build up the tension, to extend the time.
Do you see? He's fascinated by what we're doing. He's moved
Now,
right outside
we
his
can
own
get him to make sound first.
area of
Yeah.
self-stimulation. And then he introduces something new here. It's entirely his thing. And he's absolutely delighted by this. It's giving him a stronger and stronger proprioceptive signal. And he knows what he's doing when he does it. In a world that's confusing in his brain, he knows exactly what he's doing.
How is that really with him?
Just concentrating on what he was doing and
Sort of focusing
the focus into him and being really aware of what he was doing, how he was doing it, and
what that said about how he felt.
and how
Yes.
just listening to him.
Yes, listening in the sense that one listens with all one's senses.
Absolutely.
I think I would look to, using, as I say, a swing and trampoline,
Yeah.
because of this, he really likes that jolt.
And that makes him sort of centre himself, does it?
That's
Sort of that
Yes,
he knows where he is in
what
his
he's
space.
doing when he gives himself a jolt. Like,
Right.
if your vestibulus, your balance system's all over the place, if you give you're giving yourself a jolt,
And then
it actually
centres you.
it centres you. And really this is part of what we call sensory integration, and it's another part of what we do to try and bring signals which the body understands. So we're not only giving them physical stimuli, and we're also giving them stimuli that the brain can take on board immediately, which taps into their behaviour.
So because they feel centred and because the balance is right, they're more able to
connect.
to focus
Yes,
on
that's right.
what's happening in somebody else.
We just do look at one more.
Well, he finds it very difficult to join in anything, and he wanders about randomly. But I start to use the breathing rhythm, particularly the rhythm of his breathing rhythm.
That's what he's
He
listening
begins to take
his
notice almost
breathing rhythm.
immediately.
And
I've never seen Ollie Friday do that.
And you might get the eye contact, but you don't get the touching.
The touching of the face was
Yes, the
quite
touching mind and
extraordinary.
this,
Yeah.
And it started with the sound, actually. And he did like having that blowing in his ear, actually.
His whole face is lifting.
It's,
The stress.
he's so happy.
And he grabs my hands and puts them around him. And so I'm squeezing him each time he breathes. I'm tuning into his breathing rhythm. And particularly as he breath holds at this stage.
He's so relaxed. Look at his face, all the lines are coming.
Well, you're going to enjoy doing this, aren't you?
If it works like that, we'll be doing.
You will be able to. It's a technique, it's not just me.
The three girls, the assistants that are working with him at the moment, we were all amazed at the level of interaction. Just the way he went from being a young man who very rarely gives eye contact, really doesn't want to be near anybody, kept coming back to you, and asking you for, you know, the
Taking my hand and doing
taking
it,
your
he said.
hand, and the beaming smile. It was you know, actually what Emma said to me was that it was very emotional, and it was wonderful.
Absolutely
It really was. I've never seen Ollie want to be with anybody that much.
What I was doing actually was he breath holds.
I've never seen Ollie want to be with people so much. That, I think, is absolutely critical. Can we have the lights now, please? I can't show anymore. The film is on sale outside. That's the plug. It's in 3 parts. It's a training film. The first part is myself and the Royal College of General Practitioners champion for people with learning disabilities, having a discussion about the sensory nature of autism, followed by this bit. Then it goes on to talk about touch, because as you'll see, we'll be using touch quite intimately, and we have to decide how we can do this, and I recommend that there's always a management strategy, and it has to be written and signed and read and signed by anybody who is involved, so that everybody knows what they're doing, and that protects both parties. The third part is what you've seen there is highlights. The third part is an uncut 20-minute interaction with a child who starts by pushing me out of the door and is totally interactive within 20 minutes. Now, this may sound like a miracle. It is not a miracle. It is a technique. It was developed by a psychologist at Bryn and Airth Hospital, Harperbury Hospital, who fortunately was my supervisor for 4 years. It's now being used all over the world. I have invitations literally even to go to St. Helena in South Atlantic. And next week I'm in Iceland. People are using it all over the world because it works. There's now also a considerable body of academic literature. I work with Dundee University, who have analysed the films frame by frame, and there is a considerable reduction. How much more time have I got?
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, that's fine, yes, because I'd like to tell you 1 or 2 stories about older people. It's not a cure for autism. What it is a way of establishing contact. If you stop, they will regress. Now, I saw a 16-year-old lad in a day centre, and his way of communicating, he stood in the corridor, was to bash anybody who went past, you know, boom, like that. They had a team of 3 people standing over him to stop him and to intervene. They could take about an hour, and then they had to be replaced. 4 or 5 times a day, he would chuck the chairs and tables around. And those were the recorded incidents. They didn't bother about the hitting. It was just too frequent. I was asked to work with this young man when he was 16. And he made little sounds, And I taught the team to work with these sounds. And we reduced the number of the recorded incidents, that's chucking the chairs and tables around, down from 4 or 5 times a day to 2 in 6 months. Gone, basically. We're pretty sure he had earache on those days, those 2 days. Now, they then got a new team leader who said, well, I can't see any challenging behaviour here, you know, stop it. What are you doing? And I said, and so they did, and within 24 hours again, he was chucking the chairs and tables around. I went down and retrained them, and after a couple of days, he was fine again. Now, that young man you couldn't take out because he attacked members of the public randomly, and he was non-verbal. Now you can take him into a busy pub and he'll put his money on the bar and he'll say Coke and he'll go and sit down and wait for it. He was non-verbal before. Because every time he says, somebody says, So it doesn't look inappropriate in public, because once they tune into the fact you're using their language, they're very sensitive to it. And so they'll pick it up. So actually what it looks like is two friends just having a slight conversation with each other. I want to go on something slightly more complicated at this stage. Many of you will be aware, or may not be aware, but you will be if you think about it, that a number of your family or your children or whoever you're involved with have different voices. Has anybody, there's sort of good voices and bad voices. Anybody aware of that? Could you just hold up your hands if you are, possibly? How many? Nearly half. I suggest the other half of you listen. Because it's something that we really haven't thought about very much. And the sort of thing that happens is, hello Phoebe, how are you today? Lovely day today. I want to hit Phoebe, I want to hit Phoebe, I want to hit Phoebe. All in one voice, all in one breath. What we've got here is what we've taught them is socially acceptable and how they feel. And in telling people that they mustn't say they want to hit Phoebe, what we're actually saying to them is how you feel doesn't matter. And that is the quickest way of reducing their self-esteem. And it's really, really absolutely important that we validate how they feel. And in this case, I said to her, you do really sound as if you want to hit Phoebe. And she said, oh, yes, I do. Absolutely, totally dead center. We must validate these negative feelings because so many people with autism are failing all the time. They're getting things wrong all the time. We must validate their negative, not their behaviors, but their negative feelings. If somebody says to you, well, I'm going to shock you now. If somebody says to you, fuck off, and the standard approach is to ignore it or to say, don't say that, it's rude. It doesn't work, either of them. But if you talk to your line managers first and then you say to them, you sound really fucked off. And they say, oh, yes, I am. And it'll stop. It works because what you are doing is saying, I understand how you feel. They need to be tuned into. We need to respect how they feel. And that gradually builds up their self-esteem. Donna Williams talks about this quite a lot in one of her books where she's talking about 3 different voices she had. And she said she so lost connection with herself that she spent her whole time looking in the mirror because she was convinced that the image in the mirror was herself, and she actually tried for 2 years to walk through the mirror in order to get through to herself. And I noticed that a lot of the people I work with this particular problem, and they are rather further up the more able end, they are fascinated by their mirror images.